Hello everyone, Matt from Model Minutes here, and welcome back to the workbench for another unboxing. Today I'm looking at this, the vintage classic Airfix Handley Page Hampden in 1/72 scale. So join me as I get inside the box and see what this one is like. So starting off on the box, we've got the sort of traditional artwork that would have been seen on this in the past. I believe it's a Roy Cross. Yeah, up here it says pack illustration Roy Cross from 1968. So yeah, very nostalgic. It's part of the Vintage Classics range, as clearly indicated here, and you do have to go into these Vintage Classics with a little bit of management of expectations because they are going to be all relatively old toolings. So down the bottom here we've got it indicated 1/72 scale and a product code of A04011V, V for vintage. So on the thin edge we've got the information about the tooling straight off on the box, which is really great to see from a manufacturer being so honest. The mold tools were made in 1968, so already straight off the bat I've got an idea in my head of how old or sort of the quality of the tooling, the quality of the molding, and also the kind of level of details and sort of the finesse and things that I've experienced from kits of the same sort of era. So I've got my sort of expectations a little bit managed already, which is something I'd like to see other companies do as well, rather than hiding kits inside boxes, new boxes, old toolings. You take it home and you're disappointed. So 1968 tool, 1968 artwork, and some information about the aircraft, and we've got some dimensions. 226 millimeters in length, 292 millimeters in width, and 123 parts are included. However, you might be able to notice there's only one paint scheme indicated here for a 49 Squadron aircraft in 1941. We do have some colour callouts from Humbrol and one flying hour. That's a coupon, cut it out, keep it. If you're in the Airfix Club, you can redeem it for more kits once you collect them. However, if not, do hold on to them and send them to Models for Heroes so they can use them for their charitable work. Skill level 2, so potentially not the hardest kit, but it is going to need a little bit of modelling skills and experience. It's not exactly a starter set, is it? Moving on to the other edge, we've got some warnings in different languages. We do have something about BAE systems down here, so not necessarily licensed, but at the very least they're sort of acknowledging that there are rights held by someone. And we do have some addresses, and again we have got the information here about the tooling date of 1968 and the release date of 2024, which is what you want to see on a kit. So 2024, this was a fairly recent re-release in the Airfix range, and it does say that everything was made in India. We do have cartograph decals though, and they come from Italy, cartograph being some of the best decals out there. The thin edges have the same information as we've already seen. Nothing on the back other than a sort of product identifier. If you did have any problems, make a note of that, because you could send that information off to the Airfix spares department and they might be able to help sort out any problems you had. So the box comes off the top. Let's get the instructions out first and look at those. Right, so instructions in the normal format from Airfix, printed in different shades of color. We have information about the actual aircraft at the top and some hints and tips down the bottom. Wash your sprues before you build the model, just so that your paint sticks to the plastic. Different bits of information and a key to the assembly instructions down here, as is quite typical. And then we get into the instructions. So the instructions are going to be based off of the older ones, just reformatted to be in this booklet, perhaps updated slightly with a little bit more information or color callouts or so on, as different bits and pieces. So all the colors are annotated as appropriate. It does say here that we have an option of including the clear part or the guns. I believe the clear part, that sort of canopy would be folded back, I think. Oh, hang on, let's have a look here. Right, so yeah, so it's going to be that clear part and the guns, or that clear part and no guns, because that could be sort of retracted to get the guns out so you could defend the aircraft. Right, a little bit busy, quite a bit of stuff going on, so make sure you read your instructions before you build it. So we've got a pilot figure with no legs who gets glued into the sort of representation of a cockpit. We then have our fuselage. It does tell you not to glue your guns in, so you can freely move them, but I wonder how sort of optimistic that is. We have a He's either a front gunner or at least a bombardier sitting on his little stool at the front of the aircraft. We've got some decals which need to go in for control panels. We've got our rear gunner, or that's the low. I think that's the lower gunner for the sort of turret that sticks out the bottom. Top gunner. There's people inside. There's crew figures. That's at the very least. And then we assemble our fuselage and move on. So we've got top guns, bottom guns, move on to the tail surfaces. The tail plane has your vertical tail surfaces which need to be glued together. They come in a number of parts which then get glued to the horizontal tail surface. The elevator can be glued in or not glued in, as indicated here, because you may have a element of play value, as was typical of this sort of era, where this could go up and down, but I will probably just glue mine in and call it a day. We have the front glass with another machine gun to stick out through there. We have bombs. There's 4 bombs and they are an option. Then we come on to the rest of the assembly. So we have our bombs being glued onto their racks, and then the racks can go into the bottom of the plane, and the doors can be glued either open or closed, which is nice. Tail surfaces go on, front canopy goes on. Now we move on to the wings. Again, we have the option to have the wings glued together and the ailerons not glued in so that they are actually free to move, but what play value that represents, I'm not sure. Particularly if you're not careful with your glue, you'll get that stuck, so I might just glue mine in anyway. What is interesting is the landing gear also says don't glue in the landing support struts, which on both steps indicates that it may be retractable, but landing gear is only retractable if you can close the landing gear doors, and I presume this has landing gear doors. Yes, it does. It has landing gear doors, but you can't close them. You have to glue them in the open or closed position. So having this play value of having landing gear that can swing up and down into the nacelle is a little bit sort of redundant if you can't close the doors as well. I remember the Avro Anson had a very similar technique. You could sort of raise the landing gear, but that didn't matter because that didn't have doors. It just went straight up into the nacelle. Whereas on this, you've got doors which will be open, but the landing gear retracted. So personally, I think I'm just going to pick one and just glue it in that position. So landing gear wheels get glued together. And again, if you just press fit them in, they should spin freely. And here's a picture of it, sort of how it should look. But yeah, I will just glue mine all solid. I would be interested to hear from anyone who's ever actually been able to make this sort of retract or not. But yeah, let's move on. So those wing assemblies get glued into the side of the fuselage, and then we can do our engines. And the engines are a fairly simple affair. Spinner onto the propeller gets pushed into the sort of engine mount and retained by this pin. If you don't glue that into that, you should have it freely rotate. If you build it in any other sort of way, you'll end up gluing it in, I think, and a few extra details which get glued on there. And then we have some smaller bombs which can be glued together and then installed on racks which go on the outside of the wing. It looks like we've got a couple of small details such as these, I think they're like aileron weight balances to stop them from fluttering, and the engines go onto the nacelles. We've got some smaller details here on the aircraft which get glued in, sort of radio antennas and pitot tubes, tail wheel, air intakes, and is that it? Yeah, that's it. So at that point you should be done. And there's your painting scheme, all in colour, which is good to see because it makes it so much easier. Dark earth, dark green on the top. We've got a little bit of sort of gunmetal-y or aluminium on your sort of engine areas. We've got black spinners. We've got a black underside, which was typical of the time from 1941. And we've got our transfers. Not a great deal of transfers by the looks of it, but they go in position. There is a research note down the bottom here, which says the original Airfix Hampden had a mix of A and B camouflage patterns and had the serial number wrong. So this aircraft, which is called Popeye, was apparently AE236, and being an even numbered aircraft would have normally worn the A scheme. So I think that's what they're saying here, is that originally when Airfix released this as a, in the original days, they kind of screwed up a little bit with the paint scheme, but they are kind of correcting it now to be more accurate. But yeah, so instructions A little bit cluttered, a little bit busy, but I think if you sit down and you read them and you pay attention to what's going on, you can get there. Not too bad. Decals. There was a little protective sheet. So for a twin engine bomber, that's not a lot of transfers really, but we've got quite a lot of little stencily things, which I was surprised to see, which will have to be applied. I think these are the stripes for your bombs around the sort of tops of them. The tail has these ones on, that goes on the fuselage. Upper wing roundels, nose art, control panel, registration codes. And that's it. Registration looks good. Nothing seems off center. No tears, no blemishes. They're made by Cartograph. Cartograph are one of the best transfer manufacturers in the world. I very rarely have a problem with Cartograph transfers. Yeah, very nice. Hopefully they go into the model with no issues. And that brings us to the plastic parts. And you can see I've not even had the bag open. You might be thinking, oh, come on, Matt. You had this on pre-order from when it was announced as part of the 2024 range. It came in and you didn't even open the bag and have a look at it. I know. Right, let's put that over there. Clear parts first. So, clear parts. We've got a few bits of clear part in this. Front canopy there, upper canopy, lower canopy, various little windows. Yeah, generally speaking, you can tell that it's a bit old. The framework is quite pronounced. The plastic isn't as clear as I would like. There are some scuffs. There is a bit of flash that will need cleaning up. It's not as sort of clear to look through. The plastic is quite thick, which is obscuring the light. So I know there's a few bits and pieces like inside the aircraft to look at, but you're not really going to be able to see it because it's going to be obscured by the sort of way the light is bending as it goes through the clear parts. There are some scratches. There's like a line across this one, which I don't think should be there. This one has another one. I think they may be molded in rather than anything else. So yeah, just a little bit tatty, but kind of usable. I have seen a lot worse. Flash isn't terrible, but there is some stuff that will need cleaning up. So those are the clear parts. And then we're met with all of our actual plastic parts. So let's have a look through this. We've got 1, 2, loose, 3, 4, and then loose bits as well. So all of our wing and fuselage components have come loose. Someone's obviously cut them off from their main runners and just put them in the bag, but that must be part of the process. Mold quality straight off the bat, looking at it, we can see it's not the best. I mean, there's flash, there's mold seams. It's a 1968 tooling, you know, it's gonna have bits and pieces. There are little bits of scuffs on the plastic. So this is the darker grey plastic that Airfix is currently using. It does look a little tatty. I mean, some of the details are quite nice. We've got raised rivet details, as you can see on here. On this sprue, we've got our prop, landing gear components, tail surfaces, wheels, other smaller components. It's not terrible, but it's going to take a bit of work. We've got ejector pin marks here on these surfaces, but they're not going to be seen, but they are quite proud, so they're probably going to need sanding down to prevent gaps around the outside. Bit of flash on these that need cleaning off. Ejector pin marks are visible on some components, which is less than ideal, but you know, product of its time and all that. On this one, we've got all of our bombs, all our bomb halves, which need to be glued together. They look okay. We've got pylons for bombs, bomb racks, our machine guns, which are quite crude. Not as detailed as I've seen. I mean, again, product of its time. And then we've got our closed bomb bay and our open bomb bay. And you'll notice in the closed bomb bay, which isn't referenced in the instructions, I don't believe I remember seeing it, but we have a slot. And that slot, if we cut it out, could be used for a display stand, which is what I'm actually thinking I might do with this one. So this plane comes with crew, and I quite like to display my aircraft flying if they come with crew and they have the option to do so. So I may do that. I may put mine in a wheels up flying pose on a vintage display stand that I have in the stash, because I bought a sort of set of them not long ago. So that's what I think I might do. So moving on, we've got our other sort of horizontal tail surface, ailerons, crew figures. Crew figures are a little crude. I've seen worse, but I have seen considerably better. Ejector pin marks in the side of these guys looks absolutely painful. No wonder they're huddled over like that. Is that my pilot figure? He doesn't look too bad. Not terrible. What else have we got on here? Landing gear covers. And what else? Just small parts here. Engine exhausts. Interesting little bit of detail there on the wheel for the tail. Sort of molded representation of the sort of tread, I think. Wasn't expecting to see that, but yeah, cool. And this last little bit of sprue has our engine nacelle cowlings, our engine representation. A bit simple, but you know, it will do the job as a representation. Control column, other small details, horizontal tail surface, which fortunately doesn't have a massive ejector pin mark in it, cockpit component, and then another part of the tail. So let's move on to the wings. We have, I'll see if I can find the pairs. Upper and lower pairs. If we just press them together, a little bit of a warp there, not quite going together as nicely as I would hope, but you know, they will go with some pressure and a bit of glue. There is a clear part for that, which is there. It's that one there. So yeah, that's fine. Quite a lot of raised rivet details all over, as was typical. Again, you know, a little bit sort of scuffing down the bottom from the moulding, a little bit more flash, moulded holes for our sort of wing bombs. If you didn't want your wing bombs in, you'd probably have to fill those. The other wing surfaces are the same kind of deal. I mean, it goes together, doesn't it? But it's going to take a little bit of work to clean it up. And then the fuselage halves are the same. I have heard some people have had short shots, but I've not seen any during my look through the box today, which is quite good. No detail on the inside of our fuselage halves, but like I said, those clear parts are not the best, so you're not going to see a great deal. But yeah, I mean, it was a very thin aircraft, wasn't it, the Hampden? I think they said it's something like at its widest point, it was like 3 feet wide, so not very wide at all. But you know, still not a tiny plane. If we can we just do that, put that in there. Obviously not the largest kit in the world, but you know, for a 172 twin engine bomber, not too bad. Bigger than some other ones that I've experienced. But yeah, there we go. I suppose I was excited to have a go at this. But since I've had a look at it, it's not filling me with a great amount of joy. This bit here, that's off the sprue where they've cut it, but they haven't cut it as neatly. So I think I'm going to have to do some work to, if that's not supposed to be there, like there's a dent, isn't there? There's like a big hole. I'm going to have to do a bit of work to clean that up. So this is going to take a bit of work to make it look presentable. So I had this on pre-order when Airfix announced it. I was excited to have a go at it. I am seeing a lot of issues with it that I know I'm going to have to do some work to fix. I'm sure it will look lovely when it's finished, but it's not really filling me with like excitement to get started. I'm probably going to look and see if there is a aftermarket canopy masking set, because I am not sure that I want to mask this myself. I mean, I could mask it myself, but I'd rather get one, I think. But yeah, let's wrap this one up. So we've got like a lot of dark grey plastics parts, some of them off the sprue, some of them not so like well looked after where they've removed them. It's almost like they've torn it off and left a little bit of a hole in it, which I'm gonna have to address to make it look right. The other parts are a little bit crude, not terrible, but there are scuffs, there are some seams. You know, generally there's little bits and pieces that are going to need to be cleaned up, bits of flash. Decals look lovely, cartograph, so they look absolutely fantastic. And then the instructions, maybe a little bit cluttered, but printed in color, so that's really nice to see. And then all of that comes contained within the beautifully illustrated box from Roy Cross. Yeah, so thoughts. I am not entirely sure My thoughts are, I think it will look good when it's done, but I'm not sure that I'm excited to build it. I am going to probably put it on a display stand and have it flying. But yeah, it's definitely a product of its time. My expectations were kind of managed, so I'm not surprised by it. But, you know, if you saw this on the shelf thinking it was brand new, I know Airfix have done their best to tell you it's an old tooling. It's got that information on the box, which is great to see. But yeah, I have my reservations. So how much then are you thinking would this set you back? So on the Airfix website, the recommended retail price for this is £21.99, which, yes, you are getting. I mean, how many parts was it? It was 123 parts. It's not the smallest aircraft in the world, but you are only getting one paint scheme. Typically, you know, a larger kit like this would come with at least two. So you would have a choice. Whereas, you know, unless I go and buy aftermarket decals, which may not be as good quality as these, I'm going to have the exact same aircraft as everyone else who's got a Hampden. Whereas if you include two or maybe even three paint schemes, then you're spreading that pool out and you're paying a little bit more for that choice. Given the mold quality we've seen and some of the scuffs and things, you know, it's particularly that bit on the fuselage there. Was it that one? I mean, that one's not great, but on the other one, where they've basically ripped that bit of sprue out and left a big dent, that's not exactly like the finesse or quality control that we like to see. So maybe £22, £21.99 is a little bit expensive. Perhaps a more realistic price would be closer to 15, 16, maybe £17. No doubt you could probably get it cheaper from other retailers rather than at the full RRP from the Airfix website. But yeah, that is pretty much that. We know that this is an old tooling. It's going to take a bit of work to make it look presentable, and I do have some of my concerns with the model kit. But let me know down in the comments what you think of my review and whether my assessment of this vintage kit was fair. Have you built this one, and what was your experience of it? As always, a quick shout out to my Model Club members for the extra support they give the channel. A massive thanks to these guys on screen. If you'd like to join them or support the channel in other ways, check out the links in the description to find out more. The best way to support the channel though is by subscribing, so you never miss a modelling upload by making sure your notifications are turned on. Finally though, last thing to say is a massive thank you to you for watching this one, and I'll see you on the workbench again next time.